All right, welcome into Cullman today. I'm Debbie Wood along with Patrick Ray, and in our first segment today, we were talking about staging your home. We were talking about a little bit about different products out there available that would be good for you and your if you're in a position to purchase a home. But during this segment, we're going to be talking about contracts. And Patrick, contracts, even though I've been selling real estate for almost 8 years, hard to believe, but contracts are something that's confusing to me. And so I know it has to be to a person that's not licensed. And I say that, they're not as confusing as they once were. But when you enter into a contract, well, you make an offer. If I'm a buyer, I make an offer, and then you enter into a contract. I start getting confused, and they start getting confused there.
Yeah, let me help you out a little bit, Debbie. And basically, what you need to know is that Alabama is a buyer beware state, okay? It is up to the buyer to satisfy themselves with the condition of the property.
Right.
So, first thing that you need to know is the seller, and listen, most folks are going to be as honest as they can, but the seller does not have to tell you about any defects on the property. If it's a latent defect, they are supposed to share that because it's a health or safety issue, okay? Anything else other than that is not required. We don't do a checklist of things that are wrong with the property like some states do.
Right.
So when we write a contract is set up to protect buyer and seller. And it's set up to protect both parties. What happens, and I'm going to give you some scenarios in this segment if that's okay. What happens a lot of times, a buyer comes in and he writes an offer on a property. So he fills it out on the contract paper that we have. It's a 6-page contract. He signs it. He thinks, a lot of times they think, I have a contract on this house. You do not have a contract on that house. You have an offer on that property or house until both parties, buyer and seller, come to a meeting of the minds, is what they call it in our business. And that's where all the terms and conditions and price have been agreed upon. Both parties have signed the contract and the finalized date, time have been put on it. It's been witnessed by both agents, whatever the situation is. I have seen multiple times, especially on, it happens more on foreclosures than it does on anything else.
Right.
Somebody comes in and they write up an offer on a property. They sign it. They think, all right, I've got this property, it's mine, I've got a contract on it.
Right.
And the way foreclosures work, there are certain days on some foreclosures that you cannot put a bid in. There's a holding period of 10 days, and then everybody puts a bid in. So there's multiple bids on this property at times. And what happens is the company will come back and say, we want the highest and best from each party. So you go back to your buyer and say they want highest and best, and they say, well, wait a minute, I've got a contract on this property. You don't have a contract on it because at that point it's just an offer.
Okay.
So you need to know the difference between an offer and a contract. And again, that is, it's an offer until both the buyer and seller have agreed on price and terms set forth in that offer, and it's signed, and then it becomes signed and dated and finalized, and then it becomes a contract. Even if you put earnest money down as an offer, it's still not guaranteed yours. Another offer can come in at any point.
Right.
Some things to keep in mind too. I have seen with people, and I'm not saying to rush into anything by any means. And I'm a firm believer of, if you've got a big decision to make, pray about it. Take your time. Make sure it's what you want to do. But at the same time, I've seen people put an offer in, and a lot of times you'll counter back and forth. You'll put an offer in, and it's not adequate to the seller will make a counter, and you're trying to meet in the middle is what you're trying to do. If it's a house you really love, don't drag your feet on it.
Right.
Especially nowadays. If there's a house in town, the demand for people to buy a house in the city has increased so much.
Yes.
And when one that is priced right comes on the market, it's gone quick.
It's going to be gone.
So don't drag your feet about that, because you'll lose the house that you're wanting. And I'm not saying jump into it without making rational decisions.
Sure. Take your time.
Take your time, but don't take too long.
And if you have an agent, if you've got an agent that's pushing you to do that, you need to change, because you need someone that's going to work with you and and just encourage you to take your time.
Yeah.
That's an important thing.
Yeah. I'd like to go a little bit further into the buyer beware category of the contracts. Once you put an offer in, both parties sign, and it becomes a contract, there are contingencies that have to be met in order to proceed forward to close. And it's real important that you know this. The average time frame to get those contingencies, and I'm going to go over those in just a minute, get those contingencies completed is 10 days. Okay? If there's an issue, excuse me, on one of those contingencies, you've got 3 days to get back to the seller in writing with what you would like to have done. If you do not do that, legally, that seller can take that contract accepted as is condition. You're saying I'm accepting it as is condition and move forward with the closing.
Okay.
The contingencies that you're going to have, your inspections or your whatever to satisfy yourself with the house, you're going to have a home inspection. I'm telling you folks, I don't care what anybody tells you, you get a home inspection on the house.
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to cost around $350 on a house that's 5,000 square feet or under. Anything over 5,000 square feet, it goes a little more than that, but it will be the best money you will ever spend. Yes. Because it's going to tell you what the condition of the house is.
Sure.
When we list a house, we don't do an inspection.
And we don't know.
We don't. We go based upon what the seller tells us, and we go based upon what we see. And I'm not a home inspector. I'm a real estate agent. So get a home inspection. It is the most important thing that you will do.
I have a question about that very quickly about home inspections. We don't know the condition of a home, and how do you feel about, I've had folks, brand new properties that were built to their specs and they still want to do a home inspection. How do you feel about that? I encourage them that it's your money, do whatever you need to do.
I think it's great.
Okay.
Especially if if it's a home that you've had built to your specs. I want somebody to inspect it and make sure it was built to my specs.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so there's not a problem down the road. Now, again, if it's a new home, you're going to have a builder's home warranty on that house.
Yeah.
But just for peace of mind, and that's a decision, I would advise it. It's not as important maybe as a home that's an older home that's been lived in. If a home's 2 years old, I'd still get a home inspection on it.
too.
So that's probably one of the most important contingencies that you're going to have. And again, if something comes up, and let me explain this as a buyer about home inspections, it is not a checklist for you to ask for everything to be repaired.
No.
What a home inspection is for is to satisfy yourself with the condition of the property. If there's a latent defect on that property, which means if there's something that is safety or health related that could be a hazardous to your safety or health, then that is something that the seller should take care of. If it's a plug that doesn't work, or maybe a light switch is not working, little things here and there, it's not a checklist for you to ask the seller to repair all that stuff.
Sure.
That's negotiated out in the price. So you work that out in the price of the contract.
Okay.
The second contingency is going to be whether or not you can get financing. If you cannot get financing, you are not required to buy the house. You are not held to that contract. That's I don't like to say it's an out, but it's a way that keeps you from having to purchase a house when you can't afford to purchase it.
Exactly.
Again, that's solved if you go to the mortgage lender first and find out what you're pre-approved for. The third thing is going to be the wood infestation report. And again, very important document. Get a wood infestation report. Typically that's a cost of the seller. The home inspection is typically a cost of the buyer.
Right.
The wood infestation report is going to cover subterranean termites. It's going to look for fungus, powder post beetles. There's a couple other things on that list that they look for.
And that, that used to be a requirement of banks, but I understand that they do not require that any longer, but it's still something that the buyer should request.
That's correct.
And the seller should pay for that, because
that's correct.
I want to know, don't you?
I do.
Especially in our climate. So
the other contingencies, you're going to have whether the house is on sewer or septic. If it's on septic tank, you might want to get a septic tank inspection. Depending on the age of the house, you know, that's one of those that you're just going to have to decide as a buyer to satisfy yourself. We can't really tell you on that one. things have changed. If it's a newer home, the health department requires that you get certified before you put a septic tank in. They come out and inspect it. So everything should be lined up. It shouldn't be a 55-gallon drum sitting out in the backyard. But again, it's, you know, you don't know what's been down that system. You don't know, so you may want to get an inspection there. That's going to run you around $700, and that's usually a cost of the buyer. A survey. If it's a big piece of property, I recommend you, and if I were your agent, I'm going to recommend you to get a survey.
Absolutely.
Now, typically, that's a cost of the seller. Now, understand, these things that I'm talking about are all negotiable in a contract. The seller may say, no, I don't want to pay for it.
Right.
And you may still want it, so you end up paying for it.
Right.
But those things that you really need to consider getting, no matter what, especially if you want the property. Property line disagreements.
We've been through that, haven't we?
Multiple times,
Yes.
multiple times. And sometimes a survey, you know, doesn't necessarily clear that up. We've had surveys done, and the owners, the property next to it says, hey, I've got a survey that shows different.
Sure.
And you just got to work it out. That's just, but at least you know going into it, and you're not going and building a property over on somebody else's line, and then you got problems.
That's right. Question also, talking about surveys, it's not as important, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not as important if you're in a subdivision, lotted and platted, excuse me, or blocked, or in the city limits. It's not as important, correct?
It is not as important, and then again, it's not a required document from a lender unless it's a larger piece of property, maybe. Most subdivisions are going to have, when they're set up, they're going to have to go before the city and be subdivided, and the lots are going to be on it. Now, the one thing it may not have on it is the house.
Okay.
And again, if you know, that's not that big of a deal, but typically subdivisions, you know where your property lines are.
Okay. Well, those are the kinds of things that we handle for you. We help you. That's such an important reason to have a licensed real estate agent. And remember, we don't get paid. You don't owe us anything. We only get paid at the closing. So we don't sit around and worry about the time that we spend with you, because once it's closed, that's when we get paid. So
well, and let me say one thing real quick. For most people, this is the largest investment they're going to make in their lifetime.
Yes.
And you may make one, you may make 5 down the road.
Right.
But these contracts are legal and binding.
Yes.
So you need to be educated. You need to know what you're getting into. That's what we're going to do at Door Real Estate. That's one of our main goals, is to educate you as a buyer or a seller to help ease that process of selling your home or buying a home, because it can be stressful.
It can be.
And what I like to tell my folks is, put the stress on me.
Yeah, let us handle it for you.
Let me handle it, and you enjoy this process.
That's right. That's the reason we're there. So that number for Doyle Real Estate, 256-739-1444. Patrick's number, 256-708.
1872.
1872. And mine is 256-338-7234. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in today. And, of course, you join us again for Cullman Today. Thanks.
Thank you.